I know a lot of amazing artists, and I'm not doing any of those any disrespect, but Dean was the first person's work who I looked at and thought, oh, he's one of those.
I think people will look at his work and they'll just see something unique. The world that he started with, Black Hammer, for instance, the first part of that book, it's all Dean. Other artists have come and contributed, but I mean, they're playing in Dean's world, really, they are.
As an artist, there's something very admirable about how well he can do figures, characters, as well as environments, and I think not all artists can do that.
I think certainly on British comics, I think Dean sort of was a bit like a bullet from nowhere sort of thing. You know, it was quite a bold style, it was different, and it just sort of opened the doors, I think, for people to try more stuff.
I love Dean's work. In the early days, when I was trying to find my footing in the industry, he was one of my touchstones. Dean represented maybe something that I could do.
His style is sort of all-encompassing. Whereas quite a lot of other artists, you can see they've taken that from someone and that from someone else. But you don't see that with Dean. You can't see where he got any of it from.
I just want people to just throw money at him so that he can keep doing it and making amazing art.
Barnsley, an ex-mining town in the north of England and the birthplace of one Dean Ormston, drummer, DJ, internationally renowned comic book artist, and co-creator of the Black Hammer comic book universe, with a career spanning more than 30 years. A man unusually content to spend his entire life in this one small town. An artist who, after many years on the brink of global success, came close to losing everything. This is his story and the town that made him.
It was kind of like I'm guessing the archetypal tough mining town. It was industrial. Virtually everybody, every adult male worked either in a mine or steelworks, or there were just big gangs of miners walking around, and it was
we all looked different, so we attracted a lot of vocal attention.
If you were a punk or something different, it was pretty rough.
There wasn't anywhere that you could go in those days. If you wanted to go and listen to some music that you like, you'd have to go to Sheffield, go to Limit or somewhere like that.
There was bands every week, like especially the early 80s, like go see Cure one week, and then there'd be Susan and Banshees a couple of weeks later. So most of my money was spent on that or records.
The thing is, at the local discos, which were held in most pubs in those days, they would be playing the Human League, and to know that they just came from Sheffield was fantastic. You felt like anything was possible.
Small working class towns seem to produce aspiration, in my experience, and whether it's music or art, or I suppose it's a kind of way of proving that if somebody wants to drag your town down, they're not dragging you down with it. So what better way to combat that than to do something? Get in a band, and if you're lucky, you can get away from it, the town that's dragging you down.
This is the debut single by The Second Coming, which is one of two bands that Dean Ormston used to drum with back in the early 80s. Whenever we went to a gig, one of the bands would have Dean as a drummer, always.
I started at Art College playing in bands. Well, I started off playing bass, then I moved on to guitar, and we could never find drummers, so I just learned to play drums. I mean, I actually played in my mother's front room for ages. I learned in there. Some guy had heard me playing in the front room, and they needed a drummer at this working men's club. So I turned up to this gig, and it was basically an old woman on a keyboard and a guy singing. It was just so loud. After the gig, the guy says, "I'm not paying for that." So my dad was there, and my dad just got over and went, "You're paying him." So I got 20 quid for my first gig. Probably the most I've ever been paid for a gig, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, Dean was responsible for doing artwork on several records that came out of Barnsley. Silent Scream record being one. There was compilation albums that Dean Peckett made on Torment Records, and also there was the Second Coming albums. He did all those, and of course Black Lamps now. Probably get an exhibition just of Dean's artwork in Barnsley bands.
Apart from like the old classic old horror movies, big influence on my artwork. Horror comics. Used to collect the old I used to like Gene Colan, like Tomb of Dracula. That was good. There used to be these Warren magazines called Creepy and Eerie, and they had people like Alex Tothin and Al Williamson and things like just really, really superb black and white artists, and I just loved that stuff. I still love that today. If you go back to the start, it was the art tutor at Royston said, well, you're good enough, you should go to art college. And I'm like, what's that? That sounds good. Because I didn't know there was such a thing as an art college. I didn't know you could go to art college. I just expected to end up in a factory or, be a miner or something. And most of my mates end up as miners. It was, what, 76, 77 when we left. That's what kids did. I went to an art college in Sheffield. Luckily on the second year we had a tutor called Trevor Goring. None of the tutors liked comic book artwork. They didn't see any worth in it. But he turned up and I was like, it's just one day a week, but it was just perfect for me. And he just said, well, I can make money doing this. Why can't you? And I kind of thought, well, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can. I guess life's a series of lucky events. A friend of ours were living in London with one of the owners of Forbidden Planet chain. He knew I liked comics. He knew I got quite a bit of knowledge about collecting comics, so he asked me if I wanted a job in Sheffield in one of his shops.
I first met Dean, it would have been around about 87 I think, in Nostalgia and Comics in Sheffield. He was working there. I was still at school at the time, and I used to get the bus into town after school and I'd pop into this comic shop that had just opened. And then I eventually got a part-time job working at the same shop and ended up becoming manager of that shop.
I worked there on Saturdays as well. It was great fun. There was always like a couple of celebs that used to come in, like Phil Oakey used to come into the shop. Never saw him myself, but apparently he did.
I was doing like evaluations on comic collections and just basically working there part-time whilst I was drawing. Also, they let me do adverts for them.
He would design the bags for the comic shop, he'd do the drawings on them. So I didn't go to university, so working at the comic shop with Dean and the sort of social aspect of it and the work aspect of it and the learning aspect of it for me kind of felt like my university years. Big influence on me, certainly then, and a lot of stuff even then that he's sort of passed on, to me creatively, I still refer to now.
When Nick Percival was managing it, there were like a few guests, like guest signings and things, and every time they come I'd like, show me artwork. Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean, they gave me some contacts. Kev Maguire came, saw my artwork at the shop and said, well, if you can get over to New York, I'll take you around the studios. I managed to scrape money together to go to New York. I stayed there for probably nearly a month. They took me around all the studios. I think DC gave me a tryout. I got a Spider-Man story from Marvel.
And he penciled the majority of that in the comic book shop. So it was literally there with these pages, just drawing this artwork and doing it in lunch breaks and doing it upstairs and stuff. And again, it was great to see that stuff materialise.
But in the meantime, I came back and I just carried on plugging away, just trying to do comic book stuff.
One of the things that sticks in my mind is my parents used to get the Daily Mirror newspaper, and I remember opening it one day, looking at Dean Ormston in Daily Mirror, I'm thinking, what's Dean doing in Daily Mirror?
I remember some early press with Dean when he got into comics. It was things like that. I think there was one press article at the time, it was like Barnsley boy draws a fortune.
It somehow ended up in one of like a local paper that I'd been to New York and I got this interview. It was quite unusual, a guy from a small town goes to New York, gets a job drawing Marvel comics, so it was like a big deal. But it was a load of bollocks. They didn't get my A's right, they didn't get none of the facts right. They made me out to be a bumpkin. So I hated that article, but they got me a job in 2000 AD.
2000 AD, rated creep.
Communication terminated. 2000 AD. The future is here.
I think I was at a convention in London. Anyway, I think it was Richard Burton. He actually came up to introduce himself and just said, "Oh, we really like this cover you did. It was on the Daily Mirror article. Would you be interested? You know, can we get this? Can we get a print of it?" And I said, "Yeah." And anyway, so they used that as a cover, and then they just said, "Well, would you like to work?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I would. Yeah." It would either be John Wagner or Alan Grant. Was there at the same time, and they basically said, "Well, we'll write you a little short story."
Along with Alan Grant, I wrote Dean's first Judge Dredd story, The Inn Club.
I think I first met Dean when I was the assistant editor on the Judge Dredd magazine, and I was helping Steve McManus, who was the launch editor on the magazine. Dean came into the office to show his portfolio to Steve, because Steve was looking for new artists, emerging artists, to help with the Judge Dredd magazine.
Actually, I think the first thing I did was with Cy Spencer, which was a little thing we created ourselves. That was supposed to be in a magazine called Revolver, but I think that magazine folded before the first episode came out, and then I got asked to do stuff for the magazine.
So Dean brought in a huge, like an A1 or an A2 painting of Dredd that he'd done, which I think we ended up using as a cover later on an early issue of the magazine. And Steve was very enthusiastic with Dean's art, and quite rightly so, because even his very early work, you could see Dean's style in it, and you could see that he could handle a paintbrush, and you could see that he was bringing something slightly different from everybody else. And the division between people who could paint a lovely pin-up or a cover, and then the people who could tell stories was very stark. So you go, well, this is great, let's have some of this.
It was quite surreal. It was just, you know, you sort of aimed for this thing, and then suddenly you're getting offered it, and then it's quite, you know, you're like thinking, right, can I pull this off?
And we were just blown away because we all wanted to do it. And I wasn't jealous because I saw it's like he's older than me, he's more experienced than me, but I would have killed for that job. But it was just amazing to see, and obviously to know that he got his foot in the door. And I know they're obviously very impressed because, you know, they gave him work constantly after that, you know, it never stopped.
So I think the first thing of his that we published was a one-off Dredd called I Singe the Body Electric, written by Alan Grant, because Alan does love a good pun. And the artwork was great. Very, very Dean, even at this very early stage in his career.
It was a gothic, dark, sort of spooky tale. So I mean, it really played to his strengths.
And off the back of that, we went, this is great. Let's give him a multi-part story. So Alan Grant worked with another writer called Tony Luke, who created this character, this sort of alien-esque predator mashup called Raptor.
I became aware of him when he started on the Judge Dredd magazine doing Raptor, it was called. Very unique painted style. You know, it's definitely, he had a voice that was clearly kind of doing something interesting.
So Dean had the job of painting that. And at that point the magazine was monthly, so we were asking Dean to paint, I think 9 pages a month.
He's always late, Dean. He's like useless at punctuality there. We'd always have to get these trains to London, and last minute I'd see him running because he just got off his coach from Barnsley or something, just getting on the train in time. And a lot of times he was so up to the wire on his deadlines, and this was a common thing, he would paint the pages on the train.
I've never been good with deadlines.
So he'd be on the train, we've got a bit of table, and he'd be there painting these pages. And the thing is, with Dean, it was genuine. I mean, you can imagine someone doing that just for show. You know, it'd be sort of like, oh, I'm a really pretentious artist, I'm doing my art. It wasn't with Dean, it was just like he just hadn't got around to finishing it, so it was a real sort of natural thing. And even in the offices, sometimes he'd be finishing the pages off there and there, and the pages would still be wet as he was handing them over. So I just thought it was really cool, but it was a funny thing to see.
Yeah, I finished in the back of cars, I've sat in taxis and with pencils and pens and drawing, and I've done that quite a few times.
The thing with Dean is always honest. You never get a sense he's trying to flannel you or feed you a line. He will tell you if something's not going well, he will just say, it's not going well at the moment.
I don't know whether he'd tell this story, but it made me laugh. I was shocked and made me laugh at the time. The script was not to his taste, and I said, what do you do? What do you do when you struggle with something like that? He said, like, I've got a big Sharpie marker and I just cross out all the crap I don't need to know, all this internal monologue rubbish. He probably cut the script down by about 80% or something, so he had less to refer to that wasn't actually necessary for getting the job done.
Yeah, well, yeah, you have to do that sometimes. I mean, I've had some ridiculous scripts. I can't name names, but I've had some of them. You just think you can't draw that. It's impossible. How can you show emotion in somebody's foot? I mean, honestly.
The challenge we had in the early 90s, and it was an ongoing problem that 2000 AD had faced, and then the magazine faced it very quickly, was anybody who was any good, very quickly American publishers would start sort of waving dollar signs in front of them and saying, whoa, what page rate are you getting at the moment? What page would you like to get? Would you like to have your name on the cover? Would you like to have the possibility of royalties? I mean, we were paying royalties by this point, but American page rates were still better than what we could afford to pay. So yeah, it was like, let's hold on to Dean for as long as we can. But we knew ultimately that wouldn't be forever.
My first experience with Dean, actually, I think was through Cy Spencer.
My favourite of all the things he did for me was a series called Hark and Purr, written by the sadly late, great Cy Spencer.
I met Cy Spencer in the comic book shop in Sheffield. He was a regular. He was also trying out for writing scripts, stupidly intelligent, but you know, daft with it.
Cy's sort of weird oddball sensibility married perfectly with Dean's artwork.
I remember meeting Cy Spencer and Dean at those shows, and they pitched me this incredible project called Stickleback.
We set it in Sheffield originally. It was like a creature that lived in this abandoned steelworks, and kids could see it, but parents and adults couldn't see this creature.
And I'll never forget the illustration. It was this beautiful, like, straw figure. He was sort of part tree and part scarecrow, and he had a giant, like, hanger on his back, and on the hanger there were different found objects. He looked kind of like a homeless detective.
That never got published, which is sad, because it's a really nice idea. But we also came up with ideas together to, like, hopefully just impress, I guess, you know, or even get stuff published that we owned.
I think Cy Spencer was the William Blake of our times. I mean, he was a genius, and I think Dean connected with every syllable that he was given in a script, and what he brought on the page was really magic. And the two of them, in my opinion, are one of the greatest duos in comics.
We both played in bands. We both liked comic book art. We both, you know, I don't know. Again, he got a great sense of humour. He was a gentle giant. Yeah, it was great. I loved the guy.
I was the company credit card. I was fortunate to be Karen Berger's assistant editor back in those days. And she was very busy. Not only did she edit the main titles like Sandman and Shade, but she was the executive editor. So she had executive things to take care of, as you do. And so I was pretty much left in charge of entertaining the freelancers at the bar, which meant that my credit card was practically on fire by the end of the night at a British show.
Well, Shelley Roeberg at that time, this is now Shelley Bond, she approached me because I think the guy she was going out with had mentioned me from the year before. He'd seen my artwork and apparently wouldn't shut up about it, basically. Just kept going on about this guy he'd met in England. And so Shelley came over and introduced herself and said, well, we've got this writer I'd like you to work with, which was, I think, was Pete Milligan. I was doing something for magazine. It was going on for about another 6 months. So I basically said, well, after this, I'll get back to you and see how it goes. I think I did 7 pages of Sandman. I think Glyn Dillon was doing the artwork, and he tripped over Philip Bond's cat on the stairs, broke his arm, and he couldn't finish it. So they got me in, like, said, "Oh, can you do this 7 pages? It's got to be done quite quick." So I did 7 pages of that. It was, you know, the biggest comic around. Neil Gaiman, it's Sandman, you can't turn that down. It was frantic, I guess. I just remember sitting there, like, you know, through the night drawing, and we needed to get a local inker. I was penciling a page, Disraeli had come pick the artwork up, he'd take it back home, ink it, and then to get sent to America to be lettered, and you know. So it was quite frantic. It was you know, it was quite quick. I still get for 7 pages, I still get quite a lot of royalties per year just for that 7 pages, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's 30 years ago. And after that, I think I did Eaters, or The Eaters, with Pete Milligan, which is what was always planned.
My favorite work of Dean's was something that I didn't edit. So I want to give it a plug anyway, because the book that really made me go, wow, was The Eaters. And that is a book that Dean illustrated with the writer Peter Milligan.
I remember working at the comic shop, and the first big DC project, as far as I remember, was The Eaters.
Because there's just something about that book that my copy of it is like weathered. You know, I used to look at it so much.
Very archetypical American sort of family, and then the twist was they were cannibals. And I remember working on that because I remember the painting that he brought in, which was kind of like, I think he had to do 2 versions of the painting.
The 2 covers up there, because one of them got set. I think he must have done that one first, and I think they found the head a bit too much in the foreground. So he repainted it, and I couldn't choose which one I wanted, so I traded in for both of them. We used to have those up in our dining room, actually. It was great. Our vegetarian friends had come round and they never said a word.
The second thing I did at DC, I think, was Sandman Mystery Theatre with a writer called Steve Siegel.
To the best of my recollection, I met Dean in 1997. I met him at UCAC, which is the UK Comic Arts Convention that they used to have in the middle of London. And I literally met him in Artist's Alley, where he was sitting at a table displaying his art. At the time, Harkin Burr, as I recall. I bought some pages from him. And I think one of the very first things I said to him was, "I need to work with you immediately."
With Steve Siegel, I did some stuff on House of Secrets and a few bits and bobs over the years, and we kind of kept working together, wanting to work together.
Before I actually worked on any comics with Dean, the first thing that we worked on together professionally was an animated series. And what's odd to me about that is that it predates my time with Man of Action, my partners and co-creators of Ben 10, which is what I always think of as my first foray into animation, but it wasn't. Dean and I created a show called Dots Bots.
Dot, those things look like they're watching me.
It came to our house, and it seen some like little drawings I'd done of robots and things, just little doodles, and it says, "Oh, I like that." And anyway, it went away, and about a month later, he says, "I've got this idea to make a really nice animation,"
which was about a girl and her brother who live in a junkyard with their crazy grandfather. And the girl Dot creates sentient robots out of junkyard junk, which kind of sends her on grand adventures through a Barnsley-esque town, now that I realize it, having been there.
And we were going to do like a kid's book and then a little animation with it.
We sold it to a Canadian company called Mainframe Animation, and they produced a pilot, which was kind of cool, kind of fun.
And then the company got bought out by Sony, I think, and everything just changed.
At the time, heaven help us, no one thought a girl could front an action show, which is ridiculous then, it's ridiculous now. Only difference is that now I think people understand it is ridiculous, and then no one did.
Dean's greatest kept secret, which, believe it or not, is Fiona. I knew both Dean and Fiona for at least 15 years before I found out that Fiona was an incredible painter. And when I say incredible, I mean this. She's so talented. She does such beautiful retro stylings of women. very much in the Varga tradition. So when Cy Spencer and Dean Ormston pitched me Bodies, I knew there was only one cover artist for the launch book, and that was the lovely Fiona.
The story is basically a body turns up in the same spot. It's the same body, but it spans over 100 years. Well, I thought originally, this is what I was told on the phone, that this was going to be like a creator-owned book. By the time the issues came out, I think I was already on issue 5 or 6 or something like that. And I noticed inside that it was basically creator-owned by Cy Spencer, and DC Comics had basically cut the artists out. And that was basically the last thing I ever did from them, because I just wasn't happy. I met Jeff at a convention. I was thinking it was Leeds Thought Bubble.
I was at the Thought Bubble Festival. I had never been in the UK before, so that was exciting for me. And so I was just kind of going around Artist Alley at Thought Bubble, kind of looking for new stuff that to check out, but also kind of looking for some of my favorite British artists who I was hoping to meet. People like Duncan Fegredo and Jock and whoever, all these creators that I really liked. And Dean, I saw him introduce myself, and he was just sort of the most soft-spoken, kind of down-to-earth guy, so we hit it off right away.
He'd liked the artwork on Books of Magic. I've been working on Books of Magic. He realised I was there, and he came to introduce himself. He says, I really want to work with you I'm doing this stuff at DC Vertigo. Various reasons, mainly the editors didn't think I was a superhero artist, which I'm not really. I'm not a superhero artist. I'm more of a horror, underground comic artist. I'm guessing I'm not really a typical superhero artist. It just never came off.
So I think I followed up with him afterwards, just sort of keeping the conversation going, or possibly working together one day. But there were a couple of years where we just sort of exchanged emails and pleasantries, and before we really got to know each other.
So when his contract ran out at DC, he says, right, I'm going to work at Dark Horse. I've got this idea, do you want to work on it?
I'd never really written for other artists other than work for hire things at Marvel or DC, so the thought of doing a creator-owned project that I didn't draw myself was kind of foreign to me. But it became obvious, around 2013-14, that I had more stories to tell than I had time to tell myself, and Black Hammer being one of them. It was a project I still love, but I just never found the time to draw it myself. So I started looking outward for a collaborator and an artist to help do that book with. And knowing Dean hadn't really done a lot of straight-ahead superhero stuff, and his style was much more suited to horror and sort of weird stuff, I thought it would be really interesting to see all the sort of history of superhero comics, but through the lens of Dean's art style. And luckily I was right.
So I basically did some sketches and things for the characters, which turned into Black Hammer. Jeff had already kind of sold it to Dark Horse with me in mind, and he basically said to Dark Horse, right, I want this artist and that's it. So they waited for me, basically. The contract we got was we own thirds. So Dark Horse owns a third, I own a third, Jeff owns a third, which was, great. It's never happened before.
So yeah, even though I initially, I think, came up with Black Hammer on my own, the project never would have succeeded or become what it was if Dean hadn't brought everything he brought to it as well. So I do see it as a full collaboration for sure.
I just thought it was really funny that people were asking, like, oh, who's this Dean Ormston? And it's like, yeah, after 20 odd years, it's an overnight success. But Dean had been working hard for years before Black Hammer.
I think they're absolute couples goals. They're lovely. Unrealistic, I think. Make the rest of us look really bad.
They're so cute. They're like an old-time couple. They're like a couple from the 20s or the 30s. I think they could be in a Noel Coward play or something.
Fiona's always been, she's a talented artist in her own right, and she's always been incredibly supportive of Dean. They just make sense.
Dean and Fiona, they really do come as a pair, you know, in the best way. I feel like they're just sort of these two best friends who are just making art together and they never stop.
I met Dean in a nightclub called Rebecca's. Tuesday night, indie night, so it was mostly empty.
Yeah, I think she didn't fancy me, she didn't think I was that good looking. Even though I was beautiful in them days.
Like any other relationship, there's been ups and downs. Mostly ups, of course.
We like the same music, we both like pretty much the same art. We get along, you know. Not many people can actually live and work in the same house. Live and work in each other's pockets for how many years? Nearly 40 years.
But we've got enough in common. We both like art, we both like music, we both like drinking, not necessarily in that order. So it works well for us.
Obviously we love each other, you know, that's the way it works, isn't it?
It's like a Prince Charles moment, isn't it?
Whatever that is. Well, I tell her I love her all the time, and I mean it. You know, we're best mates.
Well, it was my first convention appearance since I'd had my brain injury. I was talking to Richard Starkings, and he asked me how I was doing, and I said about my brain injury, and he said, "Oh, you should speak to Dean, because he had one too."
I was in like a little restaurant or something, and I managed to bang. I have no idea how, but I managed to bang my head on a brass lamp just right on top of my head there. It made this like loud clang noise, and everybody like turned around in the restaurant and looked at me and didn't think much of it. And a couple of days later, when I was at home, I was sat drawing. At that point, Fiona was having a meeting, and our garage is at the back of the house, so I have to open the garage so she can get in. So I've always got the phone. So luckily I got the phone in my pocket, so I went to the toilet. You know, just kind of was tipping over like that. I was just like leaning against the wall. I thought, well, that's a bit weird, like, and then I stood up to wash my hands in the sink, and I just basically went like, I just tipped over. Well, it was a bit weird because at first I couldn't think, and then I realised I couldn't move this half of my body. It had gone, and I think my eyesight had gone in that eye. I managed to, with one hand, I thought, right, this is a problem. I'm obviously really ill. I managed to ring 999 on the phone. The emergency service. I managed to get the woman to understand what the address was, and I managed to slide down 2 flights of stairs, get into the doorway, reach up, get the doorway open, and I was just basically laid there, and I think I got wee all over me. A couple of neighbours had seen that the ambulance was outside the house, and they're just thinking, oh, this is really embarrassing. All my neighbours are watching. And it's weird how you think it's embarrassing over, like, I could be dying. One of the neighbours managed to contact Fiona, otherwise she wouldn't no idea what had happened to me.
I was at a rape crisis meeting because I'm the chair of my local rape crisis, and my phone kept ringing, which was very unusual. I didn't recognise the number, so I ignored it a couple of times, and then I excused myself to go in the corridor to answer it, and it was one of my neighbours telling me that the paramedics were outside our house and Dean was in a bad way, and I just went cold. I was just really confused because I just couldn't imagine what had happened. But luckily, while I was being driven to Sheffield, my phone went, and it was Dean's phone. I recognised the number, but it was the paramedic just ringing to have a chat with me to say that Dean had some weakness down his side. So I thought straight away, oh, that's a stroke. I got to the bedside and it was like, right, he's sat up, he's looking at me, he's lucid. And at that point, the doctor was coming in, doing some tests on him, and I realised that he'd got no feeling down the right side. So straight away, I'm practical. In my head, I turned over, we'll sell the house, we'll downsize, I'll look after him because we probably won't be able to work, either of us. And I was just very calm about that. I just thought, and I realised that houses, materials, they don't really matter.
It was, I mean, I spent yeah. I spent months crying. I think that's probably partially due to the brain injury, but partially due to the situation I was in, you know, just the thoughts that I couldn't play the drums again, I couldn't draw again, I couldn't DJ again, I couldn't even put records on, you know, to play records. I've got thousands of records I couldn't play.
That was the biggest fear. Once I'd got over the shock of it and thought, right, he's alive, he's mobile, he can communicate. The next really crushing fear was he's not going to be able to do the things he loves. And I thought, oh, we've got friends in the comics world that we see at comic conventions, that's part of our life. And I just thought, we're going to go to comic conventions and we're going to be punters. We're not going to be part of it as, you know, a creator. And I thought he's going to find that really difficult. I just saw that we were going to have a different life and that Dean would not be happy with the life that he, you know, the cards had dealt him, really.
I would have missed playing the drums because I love playing the drums, but I wasn't making money playing the drums. It was my, you know, livelihood.
Firstly, Dean didn't want me to tell anybody. So apart from our neighbours, nobody knew he was in hospital for the first week. And I took work on, knowing that he wasn't going to be able to work. I took work on at a reduced rate with a company that I didn't really want to work for, just so that I could keep the money coming in. And I had to work the week that he was in hospital, and fend off all the, you know, messages like from Dark Horse wondering what was happening with Dean, and Dean kept saying to me, don't tell anybody, I don't want anybody to know, because I think he wanted to get his head around it, and I don't think he could quite accept what had happened to him, and eventually I read an email from Dark Horse and I just said to Dean, I said, I'm going to have to tell him something, and he just said, yeah, okay, tell him. And that's when the conversation started about getting another artist in. And that was what Dean was frightened of.
I got an email from Fiona saying, you know, Dean had had this accident and he had brain hemorrhage or an aneurysm. It's hard to really express, like, you know, you started to sort of establishing this creative partnership with someone, and then you almost lose them like that. And, you know, the work itself doesn't really seem to matter anymore. I just kind of cared about Fiona and Dean, really. And
I don't think I'd even finished the first issue, and then I had the brain hemorrhage. So the editor at the time kind of said, well, we can't wait for him. We can't, you know, we'll get somebody else to draw it. And Jeff just said, no, you're not doing that. So they waited. And at that point, I didn't even know if I could draw again. I had no idea.
And, I didn't really know what to expect, if the book would ever happen or if Dean could ever really, finish it.
I remember probably the first 6 weeks, I think I just sat and watched Breaking Bad.
It was slow progress, but Dean was very determined. Anybody who knows him knows he's really stubborn, and I think that came into play in his favour. Because I think a lot of people might have gave up. And I heard him being interviewed, and he said that he spent a lot of time watching TV. He didn't. We spent very little time watching TV. He spent a lot of time sat at his desk. And when I asked him why, he says, because I'm training my brain to know that this is where I sit, this is what I do. I don't sit on the settee watching TV.
I did spend 6 months between trying to draw and spending crying, just crying and drawing.
We'd go for walks in the park, and the first time we did, he'd got a stick and link in my arm, and we only got to the gates. We didn't even get inside the park, and it's only across the road, and we had to come back. And then the next day, got a little bit further, So it was slow progress, but steady.
The first thing I think I did as well, I had to learn to draw with a mirror. So they gave me a box, and you try and draw with your left hand and try and match it with your right, so you'd like going like that. Because your brain can see that right hand moving. You can't see your right hand. Your brain sees your left hand moving. And so you're kind of going like that. You're watching this, and it's like your right hand's drawing. I think the therapist told me just start really big and just start drawing. I think I got a roller like a wallpaper, and I just started drawing really big. I couldn't do that kind of motion, so it's kind of like a big clamp.
Well, when the physio had told him to go big, she says, you'll not be able to hold a normal pen, but get a big jumbo pen. So that's what we did. And he started painting and drawing really large. And we realised his style was the same, because that was the fear, that the style would be different. When we realised that his style was the same, we knew he could have some career in art.
I think the first time I realised I could actually draw again, I did some like horror paintings. Like I did Bride of Frankenstein and Christopher Lee and things like that. And because I didn't have to tell a story or concentrate or draw from memory or from something out of my imagination or whatever, it was just basically, right, you've got a photo, I'll draw it down onto a board and I'll paint it, and I did that, and I thought, right, that if I can do that and I can get my brain working, I think I'll be able to make a living. Because I just thought, well, if I can't draw comics, I can do paintings and turn them into prints and sort of thing. So that's that point. I think that was after about 4 or 5 months.
For me, I just felt a bit more comfortable thinking, well, at least he can still be an artist.
Slowly but surely over the next year and a half, he started getting a little bit faster and a little bit faster, and then pages started coming in again. And he just was kind of back at it really, before I knew it, which is, a pretty incredible testament to his determination and his love of making comics. And by the time we started publishing it, Dean was kind of back up to about 70%, speed of what he had been. So we just kind of kept rolling. And then, of course, the Eisners and critical acclaim and the sales success and everything came after that. So it couldn't, aside from my own success, it's so nice to see that Dean had that success after what he went through and how hard he worked to get back at it.
It's amazing that he's managed to come through this and carry on creating.
I mean, obviously the body of work that I've seen that he's produced, since The Hemorrhage is, that's, I think, some of the best work I've ever seen him do.
Oh, he seems to have made a great recovery. In fact, I don't think many people would be able to tell that he'd had a brain hemorrhage, not in the conventional sense.
He'd gone from not being able to do really basic stuff, like when he was first injured, and to drawing again, drumming again, going to conventions again.
But no, it's incredible what Dean's done and how he's recovered from that, and how he's sort of built the new Dean Ormston out of what occurred. So if I was wearing a hat, hats off to him.
It's like when you read a novel. If you read a novel, you're not looking at pictures, physical. You visualise what that person looks like, and as it goes along, you get more and more of an idea what that person is, and that's basically where you start with it. You get a script and you think, right, okay, this guy, this is a motivation for this character, and this is what this guy looks like.
Close on Abe, as he bends and pours the feed corn into the pig's trough. He wears a plaid shirt, a worn bull cap, old jeans, and muddy rubber boots. He is about 65 years old.
That's panel 1, rough line. Panel 2, close up, zoom in. That is how a page starts out, and it's so rough and simple, but it's important because I can see that there's a thread running through. I can see the story, and I can also see that there's enough room for the word balloons. So then I will take that and start, as you can see, that's started to tighten bits up. I used to draw in quite quite a soft pencil, so that the pages would be really dark, but these are real light, and that's since the brain injury. I've got no proper control of this hand, so the soft pencil I just used to end up with like a completely smudge page. This pencil doesn't smudge, it's like really quite hard, so it's quite faint. Some artists will just ink over top of that. I scan them. The reason I do them slightly larger is because if I ink something and I make a mess, I can print another one out and re-ink it. Also, my hand is not steady enough now to ink that small. A lot of artists now work on like graphics tablets. They just draw on a screen, and there's no physical artwork. It's drawing on a screen, they can ink it like on a screen. It's ready to print, basically. I've got a drawing tablet. I've had it for 3 years and it's never been plugged in. It's just sat in the corner. So I'm quite old-fashioned in that way, so my process is not going to be a lot of people's process. I am using, some modern techniques, but I genuinely do like seeing original artwork, and it's getting less and less and less, because even if somebody prints like 1 or 2 copies out of their artwork and say it's original, it's not drawn, it's done on a computer, and I don't. But there's something about the atmosphere of having original artwork, like all this stuff on the walls. There's something about it. Stuff I've done in the past, it's always been owned by other people, no matter what I've created, or I co-created a character for a Lucifer comic. It's called Elaine Belloc. She was in loads of issues right up until it ended, like 70 issues, something like that. But I don't own it. That doesn't happen with Black Hammer. It's enjoyable in the fact that I'm not getting told what to do. I'm not getting told to change anything. Oh, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do that? It's like it's my decision. It's purely my decision. I genuinely don't know what anybody sees in my artwork. I have no clue. I have no idea. The biggest shocker of my life was when Mike Mignola came up to me at a convention and said he wanted to work with me, and I was just thinking, why? I'm not saying there's no worth in what I do, it's just I just genuinely don't know, because I think most of the stuff I do is terrible. A lot of the early stuff I hate so much that I wish I'd not sold them. I'd still got them, and then I could rip them up and burn them and just get rid of the evidence.
So the project that Dean and I worked on the longest is an original graphic novel called Donor, and it's about a woman who tragically passes away suddenly, and her organs are put into other people, and she retains consciousness and tries to reconnect with her boyfriend for one last critical message through the bodies of these other people.
120 pages, painted, which sat on the shelf for 7 years.
We worked on it, I think we started in 2006 or 7, and we worked on it for years and finished it. And then the Vertigo imprint suffered some financial collapse. And they said, we're going to put this book on hold. Then they said, we're going to cancel this book for now, but we'll come back to it. And Dean and I started this process to revert the rights so that we could publish it elsewhere. And that got held up for many, many, many years. And we are currently working to put it out ourselves. Publisher still to be determined, form to be determined, but it's a gorgeous book. It's maybe one of Dean's just most beautiful things that he's ever done, and no one has seen it, which is a tragedy that we plan to rectify.
And ironically, it's about a girl who has a brain hemorrhage. I just finished the last issue of Bodies, and Si sent an email round to all the artists apologising for the fact that we've been cut out of this deal, and just basically said, right, I'm going to cut you back into the royalties deal, you know, and make sure you get some sort of credit for it. Obviously, sadly, Si died before Bodies TV series became in production. When Si died, he didn't know this was going to happen. And now his favourite actor's in it and he doesn't know. The money side of it, I'm not bothered. I'm really not bothered. It was a principle that you co-create something and you just cut out of it. And it's a problem at big companies. It's like, you know, you create something for us, but we own it, and that's it. You know.
Dean and I are doing a Madame Dragonfly series that he's going to draw, which is exciting. He really wanted to do something a little more horror themed, but still within the universe. So he's doing that. When we get that done, Dean and I have one last final Black Hammer story to tell.
Our agents basically did this deal with us and with Amazon. So I think the idea is to do like a 13-episode series, a Black Hammer, and that's very exciting. But we did have times when we just thought, right, that's it. What are we going to do? And I think that's when we came up with the idea of the bar called Spiral City after the comic. We thought, right, the comics pretty much funded this bar. We've designed it so it looks Art Deco, so it's like a 1920s New York building. We've tried to kind of tie it into the comic.
Most people would have probably bought flash cars, flash holidays. Me and Dean thought, no, we'll buy a bar, invest back into the town that we love, and make it like a nice place for people to visit, and hopefully people from outside Barnsley will want to come to.
I'm happy. I'm a very happy person. I'm kind of, you know, I'm on a constant. I wake up, I go to bed happy. If I can't work, I can just accept it. I just think, right, I can't work today, that's it. But I'm in a lucky position where I've done enough Black Hammer pages to actually make royalties, and it's making, you know, I can make money, I can survive. I'm hoping the bar does well and we can make money out of that and survive, because I think I will get to a stage where I just probably can't do it anymore. I don't know.
Most people would see you as, you know, successful. You know, you've got some degree of wealth that you could apply to pretty much anywhere in the world, and you could do the thing that you're doing pretty much anywhere. So why do you stay here?
There's one answer to that really. Why not? I can't say why not. I do like Barnsley. I think it's great. I love the place. It's, you know, and I will defend it. people are nice. It's just it's a real nice place to live. Wherever you are, if you've got good friends and good family, that's all that's important. And I've got good friends and good family.
Boom.